Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Israel has launched strikes on Iran's nuclear sites under Operation Rising Lion, calling Iran a threat to its survival. Blasts rocked Tehran with reports of civilian casualties and the death of top Iranian generals. A state of emergency is now in effect. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has visited the Ahmedabad site where a London-bound Air India flight crashed, killing over 260 people. Modi called the tragedy heartbreaking beyond words. A U.S. appeals court has temporarily allowed President Donald Trump to deploy the National Guard to Los Angeles, pausing a lower court's ruling that had blocked the move. The decision grants a temporary legal win amid ongoing challenges. The UN General Assembly has passed a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urging global pressure on Israel to end its blockade and allow aid into the Strip. Ukraine's President Zelensky plans to urge Trump at the G7 summit to toughen sanctions on Russia. As peace talks stall and Moscow advances in Sumy, Trump expressed disappointment in both sides, while Kyiv says it's still pushing back Russian troops. Lebanon's health ministry says an Israeli drone strike killed one person in Nabatiyeh. Despite a ceasefire with Hezbollah, several other airstrikes were also reported across southern Lebanon. Syria says an Israeli raid killed a civilian and detained 7 people near the Golan Heights. Israel claims those captured were Hamas members as cross-border tensions remain high. Tensions erupt across the Middle East after Israel launches a wide-scale preemptive strike on Iran. Iran has now closed its airspace until further notice. Iranian state TV confirms a new blast at Natanz this morning. The country's air defense is fully activated. Civilian areas in Tehran were also struck. State media reports women and children killed. Earlier explosions were heard across Tehran and at the Natanz uranium enrichment facility, which was reportedly hit several times. Air raid sirens were activated in Tehran and several Iranian cities following Israeli airstrikes as air defenses responded to incoming threats. Let's listen in. Prime Minister Netanyahu confirmed in an official statement that Israel launched Operation Rising Lion to eliminate Iran's nuclear threat. He said they struck key sites including Natanz, nuclear scientists, and missile programs. The operation will continue as needed. Here's what the Israeli Prime Minister has said.
Months ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
On the military front, Israel's military says it has completed the first stage of its assault, targeting dozens of military and nuclear sites. Among those reportedly killed is Iran's Revolutionary Guard's Chief Hossein Salami and top nuclear scientists. Israel is calling it a historic campaign unlike any other. Army Chief Eyal Zamir warns of a strong Iranian response, saying absolute success cannot be promised. Here's what the Israeli Chief of General Staff had to say.
אזרחי ישראל, אינני מבטיח לכם רק הצלחות. המשטר האיראני ינסה לפגוע בנו בחזרה. הספיגה צפויה להיות שונה מזו שהורגלנו אליה. צה"ל נערך למתן הגנה מרבית לעורף הישראלי, ואני קורא לכם לגלות אחריות אישית, משפחתית וקהילתית ולהישמע להוראות.
Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz also commented, saying that the country is at a critical juncture and warned that failing to act now means losing the chance to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Here's what he has said. Iran state media also reports civilians, including women and children, were killed in strikes on residential areas in Tehran. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stated that Israel's attacks expose its vile nature, adding that the assault has sealed a bitter fate for Israel, which it will be inevitably facing. Global leaders are urging calm after Israel strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. The UN chief called for maximum restraint, warning of a deepening conflict. Iran claims the US backed the attack, but US Secretary of State Marco Rubio denied any involvement, stressing protection of American forces. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong said the escalation is alarming and risks regional instability. New Zealand's Prime Minister called it unwelcome, warning of miscalculation. Japan's top spokesman pledged diplomatic efforts to calm tensions. The message from world capitals is clear: avoid war, restore dialogue, and prevent further regional chaos. Now we have guest Daniel Wagner. He's a CEO of Country Risk Solutions. He's joining us live from Colorado, US. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What does Israel's Operation Rising Lion signal about its strategic intentions towards Iran's nuclear program, according to you?
We have to remember that for Israel, this is an existential threat. So the U.S., for example, is very far away. For the U.S., it's a question of avoiding a nuclear proliferation among the other Middle Eastern powers that might be inclined to do so if Iran got a nuclear weapon. But for Israel, it's very much a question of does it exist or does it not if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. So, the markets are going to be inclined to have sharp declines in the next 24 hours. But my view is that if Israel is successful, they should actually be rising, because that implies that there's much less of a chance that there will be nuclear proliferation among many of the Middle Eastern nations.
And building on that, Daniel, how significant is the strike on Natanz, and what does it mean for Iran's nuclear capabilities going forward?
So the Israelis, of course, knew that much of Iran's nuclear infrastructure is buried pretty far beneath the surface of the country. So they had to use sufficient firepower to be able to disable that. I suspect that those bombs were actually coming from the U.S., since I don't think Israel can make it themselves. That all said, I don't think they would undertake such an operation unless they had that sufficient firepower. And my guess is that for each of these cities where they are and sites where they have applied these strikes, that they will have done a sufficient job, or at least as an opening salvo, to disable the ability of the Iranians to retaliate. Let's not forget that in previous strikes a few months ago, that's exactly what the Israelis did. They disabled the ability of the Iranians to retaliate. And my suspicion is that that would have been a sort of the first strike for the Israelis, or perhaps similarly at the same time that they struck the actual facilities, maybe do another blow against the air retaliation capabilities.
And now that the global diplomatic responses were pouring in, do you think calling for maximum restraint is adequate for stopping regional war?
Well, I think that most of the world's powers are going to be clapping behind the scenes that this has finally happened. Let's not forget that the Israelis have wanted to do this for many years, and the Biden administration wouldn't let them do it for at least the last 4 years. So with the negotiations going on with the Trump administration, one could have said this was slightly premature. Let's wait for the outcome and see what happens with the negotiating process. But my sense is that if the Israelis went ahead and did this, then behind the scenes, it must have been pretty clear that those negotiations were either going nowhere or were going to lead to some sort of a stalemate or the place that they were before. And the Israelis, of course, then would be asking themselves, well, what good does that do? It's just a question of time until they build their forces up, the Iranians. And the Iranians, of course, have cheated numerous times on the JCPOA. So question being, were the Israelis supposed to wait until this was just another matter of time, until they had to act years from now? And I think they said, well, we can't afford to do that. That's why they did what they did.
And what are the implications for U.S. troop stations in close by regions like Iraq and Syria and the Gulf if hostilities intensify?
I don't think there's any question that the Iranians are going to presume that the Americans are certainly aligned with the Israelis and perhaps even gave them the weapons to do this attack. So I've got to think that the American troops and the American bases throughout the Middle East are going to be at risk. And that is the reason, I presume also, that the Americans and the Brits and some other countries basically said all non-essential personnel should leave the embassies, and they put their military bases on high alert in recent days.
And how might this affect other regional flashpoints like Hezbollah in Lebanon or Houthis in Yemen? Are we looking at a multi-phased front escalation?
I doubt it. Let's not forget that the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, they've all been neutered by recent Israeli attacks in the previous months. That all being said, it's part of a grand calculation, I would argue, that the Israelis made. Basically weaken the Iranian proxies first, then go after the head of the snake, if you will. And that's exactly what they appear to have done.
Thank you very much, Daniel Wagner, for joining us and bringing your expertise to our channel. Now we move on to our next story. A deadly air disaster in India has shocked the world. A London-bound Air India flight crashed minutes after takeoff from Ahmedabad airport, killing at least 265 people. The Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner slammed into a residential neighborhood, with witnesses saying its nose landed on a student canteen, while the tailpiece was lodged in a nearby hostel. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, visibly shaken, visited the crash site in his home state of Gujarat, calling the incident heartbreaking beyond words. Rescue teams are still combining through the wreckage with sniffer dogs. Officials warn the death toll could rise as DNA identification continues. The plane was carrying 242 people, including 169 Indian nationals, 53 British nationals, and 7 Portuguese nationals, and 1 Canadian national. Incredibly, one person survived, identified locally as a British national of Indian origin, now in hospital. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed a team has been sent to assist in this investigation, describing the incident as devastating. US President Donald Trump has also called the crash horrific, offering support to India. This is now one of the deadliest aviation tragedies in the last decade. Now we have reporter Anand Singh. He's a senior correspondent. He's joining us live from Ahmedabad. Anand, what can you tell us more about the situation on the ground over there in Ahmedabad?
Yeah, look, even since this deadly crash that took place in Gujarat's Ahmedabad at around 13:38 hours on Thursday afternoon. So clearly, this was the same hostel building on which the Air India 171 Boeing's Dreamliner 7878 crashed on this building, which was carrying around 242 people on board, out of which 241 people have died. And as you can see, I will just ask my video journalist to show you the footage over here, that how SDRF personnel and the district administration as well as police are over here to carry out the rescue operations. The rescue operations went on since yesterday afternoon till 12 in the midnight, and by then several of the dead bodies were pulled out. As you can also see the damage that this air crash has done to this building. The one side of the building is completely painted white, whereas after the impact and after the fire that engulfed the entire aircraft over here, so the entire building has turned black with the and then we can see that several of the forensic experts are also here. They are trying to locate the flight data recorder as well as the black box to ascertain that what caused this deadly air crash over here in Gujarat's Ahmedabad. So clearly several of the police personnel, so they have completely cordoned off this area and no one is allowed to enter, as they have mentioned that this area is under control of them, as they need to carry out several of the probe to ascertain that what was the reason that this accident took place here in Ahmedabad, one of the deadliest air crashes in India's aviation history. So clearly the administration is also helping all the people over here, as well as Prime Minister Narendra Modi today in the morning visited this crash site, and he also interacted with several of the forensic officials as well as the NDRF personnel, the National Disaster Response Force, who were available over here, and they were carrying out the rescue operation since yesterday afternoon. So clearly the Prime Minister Narendra Modi visibly shaken. He was accompanied by Gujarat Chief Ministers, his home state Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel over here, and then Prime Minister Narendra Modi also visited the civil hospital. And if we talk about this crash site, then this is one of the building in which several of the this is one of the residential building which was also used as mess for the intern doctors over here. So several of the intern doctors are also feared to be dead over here in Ahmedabad in this crash. So clearly the Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself is now monitoring the entire situation. He is going to hold a review meeting over here with senior officials and to find out that what all preparedness the state government has made in view of as several of the dead bodies were being brought out from this crash site, and how they plan to identify them, as DNA tests are to be ascertained. So clearly all these arrangements are being looked by Prime Minister himself, who himself flew to Ahmedabad today morning, and he was received by Union Civil Aviation Ministers of India Ram Mohan Naidu along with the Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel. So clearly the state government and the central government here in India, they are also trying to find out the root cause, that how this aircraft, which was airborne for less than a minute, in fact it was only for 59 seconds that after it took off and then it crashed on this building. And if we talk about the locality over here, then on the right hand side, I will just ask my video journalist to pan the camera and show that there is civil hospitals, another part, that is ICMR NIOH, National Institute of Occupational Health. And if this aircraft would have crashed not on this building but on some other buildings, then the scale of the disaster would have been much more greater, because there were several hospital premises from this right hand side end of this hostel area over here. So clearly the aircraft Boeing 7878, the Dreamliner, one of the finest aircraft in aviation sector, has crashed over here. And now the Boeing has also issued a statement, and they have said that they are going to help the Indian authorities and Air India, the carrier which was using the Boeing aircraft, that they are going to help them in this probe. And even the government of India has launched a probe to ascertain what were the causes that led to such a big disaster in India's aviation history. Because 3 or 4 decades ago, there was a similar tragic accident in India's aviation sector, after which India's has never witnessed such a big disaster in aviation sector. So clearly the government is now going to take some more steps to ascertain the safety and of the passengers traveling in the airline sector. Back to you.
And Anand, we have heard reports on one survival. It's a miracle. And what more can you tell us about confirmed casualties and the one survivor so far?
Yeah, one of the survivors who is of British national and of Indian origin, he was seated on seat number 11A, but he miraculously survived in this tragic air crash, and he was soon taken to the civil hospital here in Ahmedabad, which is one of the biggest hospitals in Asia. So clearly he has been admitted over there and he is being treated by the doctors at the hospital. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself, who visited the civil hospital earlier this morning, he is said to have met the survivor, the lone survivor of this disaster. And even if we talk about several of the other deceased who lost their lives in this tragic accident, so clearly the Prime Minister Narendra Modi was also briefed about that, how the government is trying to ascertain their identities so that the compensation can be paid to those families. Even as Air India has already announced a compensation of 1 crore to each and every victim of this air disaster. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Anand Singh, for joining us and giving us live reporting from Ahmedabad. Now we move on to our guest. Now we move on to our next story. Now we move on to North America. In the latest development, an appeals court has temporarily allowed President Trump to continue deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles, pausing a lower court's order that had declared the move illegal. This comes as a federal judge has ordered U.S. President Donald Trump to return control of California's National Guard to Governor Gavin Newsom, calling the president's actions illegal. The judge ruled that Trump's decision to deploy Guard troops to protest hit Los Angeles, despite the governor's objections, exceeded his authority. The move marked the first time since 1965 that a president federalized a state's National Guard without consent. Trump claimed Los Angeles was burning amid immigration protests, but the court found no evidence of a rebellion or organized violence. The judge said the protests were largely peaceful and centered on immigration raids, not an attempt to overthrow the government. Governor Newsom welcomed the ruling, saying Trump is not a king, and accused him of a power grab. The order is paused until Friday noon as the White House files an appeal that may head to the Supreme Court. Let's listen in to what California Governor Gavin Newsom has said.
Today is a big day for the Constitution of the United States, for our democracy, and I hope it's the beginning of a new day in this country where we push back against overreach, we push back against these authoritarian tendencies of a president that has pushed the boundaries, pushed the limit, but no longer can push this state around any longer. So I'm very hopeful this order puts that in perspective, and hopefully Donald Trump will immediately back down. The courts have ruled on the Guard. They will be back under my command, and he'll be relieved. Donald Trump will be relieved of his command at noon tomorrow.
The United Nations General Assembly has passed a resolution demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, with 149 countries voting in favor. The non-binding text urges all nations to apply pressure on Israel, including taking all measures necessary to enforce international law. The resolution also demands the unconditional release of all hostages taken during the October 7 Hamas attack and calls for an end to Israel's blockade on aid into Gaza. It condemns the use of starvation as a method of warfare and criticizes Israel for blocking humanitarian access. Israel's envoy called the measure a farce, while the Palestinian ambassador urged countries to take action, including cutting off arms and money to Israel. This vote follows a U.S. veto at the Security Council last week and comes as humanitarian conditions in Gaza continue to deteriorate. Listen in to the Riyad Mansour, Palestinian ambassador to the UN.
Draft resolution stresses Israel's obligation as occupying power to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches all the population in need and demands the immediate and permanent facilitation of full, rapid, safe and unhindered entry of humanitarian assistance at scale, including food and medical supplies, to and throughout the Gaza Strip, and its delivery to all Palestinian civilians.
Danny Danon, Permanent Representative of Israel to the UN. Dorothy Shea, U.S. Representative to the United Nations. Barbara Woodward, UK's Ambassador to the UN.
But this resolution in front of you says nothing about that. It does not acknowledge the facts. It does not hold Hamas accountable. Instead, it hands Hamas everything it wants: time, leverage, legitimacy. By adopting this resolution today, you will give Hamas political cover. You will strengthen their hand. And you will tell the families of the hostages that their loved ones are no longer your priority.
This draft resolution sends an unacceptable message to Hamas and other Iran-backed terrorist proxies. And that message is, you will be rewarded for taking hostages, diverting aid, and launching attacks from civilian areas. Mr. President, colleagues, blind support to Hamas by the members of this body further undermines the meaningful diplomacy underway to free the hostages and emboldens Hamas as the terrorist group continues to reject ceasefire proposals accepted by Israel.
Israel and Hamas need to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, that Hamas must immediately and unconditionally release the hostages, and that Israel, as the occupying power, must end its blocks on aid and ensure unhindered humanitarian access. And crucially, there must be an end to any actions that stand in the way of a two-state solution and the best chance for peace for the Israeli and Palestinian people.
Meanwhile, Egyptian authorities have detained over 200 pro-Palestinian activists in Cairo ahead of a global march to Gaza. The activists from over 40 countries had planned to march to the Rafah border to demand aid access into Gaza. Some were held at Cairo airport, others were questioned at hotels and phones confiscated and belongings searched. Several were later released following diplomatic intervention, while others were deported. Egypt says border visits must be approved officially, even as pressure mounts on Israel to lift its Gaza blockade. Meanwhile, Israel has deported 6 activists who tried to break its naval blockade on Gaza. 2 others remain in custody. The flotilla was intercepted in international waters, sparking global condemnation. Now we move on to Israel-Lebanon. Tensions are rising again on the Israel-Lebanon border as Israeli drone strike killed 1 person in Nabatieh al-Fawqa in southern Lebanon, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. State media says the strike targeted a motorcycle and was one of the several Israeli air raids across the region. This comes despite a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah reached in November last year to halt more than a year of fighting, including 2 months of all-out war. The deal required Hezbollah to pull back to the north of the Litani River, while Israel was to withdraw from Lebanese territory. But but Israel still holds 5 strategic positions and last week said it will keep striking until Hezbollah is disarmed. No comment yet from the Israeli military on Thursday's strike. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.